Good morrow, friends. This is Jordan, and you're listening to Not Strictly History. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Not Strictly History. Today is a very special day. I say that every time. I understand this, but today is our Halloween episode, and we have a special guest today because it is our Halloween episode. Today, with us on the pod is one of my best friends in the whole world, Quinn. And she's joining the podcast today for many reasons, but mostly because she is the spookiest gal I know, and it is, in fact, spooky season. Welcome to the pod, Quinn.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Anytime. So I like to, every time I do a collab, this is the second time, I like to ask, how does it feel to be on such a renowned podcast?
Well, how does one describe such an honor? I'm truly speechless. No words can describe how I feel right now because I am so honored.
Good.
I know that sounds sarcastic, but thank you for having me.
No, the genuine feeling came through loud and clear. So, okay.
I'm glad.
So, okay, Quinn and I have been friends for, has it been 7 years?
I
think it's been 7 years.
I think it has. Yeah, that sounds about right.
That, I don't know why that makes me uncomfortable. That's a really long time.
Passage of time, man, it's a scary thing.
It's wild. So Quinn and I actually met on a study abroad tour of England, Ireland, and Wales, and bonded over many different things. Probably the biggest one being what a disappointment Dublin was.
Yeah. I mean, we were there for maybe 2 days.
That's true. I mean, okay.
Maybe we didn't get a lot of what Dublin had to offer, but what we saw was, I don't know. It was okay. I mean, Dublin's a nice city.
It was fine. But do you remember those old men who kicked us out of their pub?
They did?
Yes, you don't remember
Was I there?
Yes.
Was I not? I don't know. Was I there?
No, I promise that you were there. Me and you and Kaylin, we all walked into this pub because we were starving, and these very old men were sitting at the bar eating something vaguely potato-y. And we were like, hey, can we get a table? Can we get a menu? And the bartender straight up looked at us and said, we don't serve food here.
I have no memory of that.
It was wild. And we looked at the men who were sitting there eating food, and we were like, okay. And we just turned around and left.
I have no memory of that.
Well, that's
wild.
You probably blocked it because of trauma. Anyway,
maybe.
So, that's a story from when we first became friends, but that's actually not why we're here. We're here today to talk about Jane Eyre.
We are.
We're here to talk about Jane Eyre, the book, the story, all of the things. Now, at first glance, I feel like the average person would not think that this is the most obvious topic for our Halloween episode. But
yeah, I could see that. But, Halloween isn't always just, scary. It's also, spooky. And Jane Eyre is definitely spooky.
It is. It's actually wildly spooky. So,
quite spooky.
Yeah, that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be diving into the novel, the characters, the supernatural, as well as discussing our very own visit to the moors of England and all of that jazz. So let's get into it, shall we? I've also invited Quinn onto this episode because Quinn is a massive Jane Eyre fan, biggest Jane Eyre fan in the whole world. So it wouldn't really be good or decent to do this episode without her. So we're going to start off kind of by getting a bit of background on that. Quinn, please tell us your history with Jane Eyre.
Well, I first read Jane Eyre when I was maybe between the ages of 10 and 12. So it was almost 20 years ago now. Goodness gracious, to think about that. And it really gripped me in the beginning because it's just like, damn, Jane has it so bad.
Yeah.
She does.
Mm-hmm.
Like her childhood is rotten.
Mm-hmm.
But then, just also it kind of birthed my love of kind of gothic mystery, gothic aesthetic. And really, I wouldn't be the person I am today without reading, Jane Eyre as a child. So yeah, I love it a lot.
I love that. What if you had to like pick your favorite thing about this story, what would it be?
Well, I really love, Jane Eyre as a character because, she's not.
Oh no, you guys, we have lost Quinn. Just so you know, if you couldn't tell, she is coming to us via telephone, and I just propped my phone up in front of a microphone. Listen, it's a little ghetto around here, and we're doing our best. And I keep saying this. I'm talking. I just keep talking, thinking that she's about to call back any second, and it's not happening. So let me give her a little ring and see if we can get her. Quinn,
Yeah.
we lost you.
Oh man, I had such a good speech.
Oh yeah, we lost you like a minute ago.
Oh damn, that was so good.
Okay, just start from the very beginning if you would.
Okay. Recap what I said before you lost me.
I think the last thing that we heard was that you just really like Jane Eyre as a character.
Okay. Yes. Yeah, I do because she's really quite a feminist figure. Not really by today's standards, but back then, a character that who went out and did what she wanted. She didn't really conform to what the men in her life thought she should be, wanted her to be. She kind of did what she believed was right and what she wanted. She had desires and dreams, and she went out and she achieved them, and that's amazing. So yeah,
It really is.
Kind of in a nutshell what I was saying before you lost me.
One of the things, I mean, like, if not the thing that I love the most about Jane is that she's able to do all of that despite having like the crappiest childhood ever.
Mm-hmm.
Like, everything in her life should point to her not being able to achieve anything and not being worth anything, but she just like doesn't care.
Yeah.
And she just does it anyway.
Yeah, and it really shapes, who she is and how she sees the world. When she's, in Thornfield and she's tutoring Adele, and Mr. Rochester is just kind of, oh, she might be my child, but I don't really care. She's not very bright, and she really calls him on it. Like, she's a child; she deserves to be loved. And that was from her own childhood where she wasn't loved and she didn't have anyone to really advocate for what she needed, and so that's what she became as an adult. And I think that's I think that still I think rings true today. Just you can kind of like thrive above what you came from.
I agree. I think she's a really great example of that. Okay, my experience with Jane Eyre, I read Jane Eyre for the first time, I think I was 12. And I had actually just recently read Emma by Jane Austen. And that was my first Jane Austen novel, was Emma, which is like I have such fond memories of that, and that's definitely a story for another time. But like, I had just come off of Jane Austen, right, which is very lighthearted and beautiful and like just lovely. And then I was like, okay, Jane Eyre, let's do this. And right from the get-go, this book is so wildly different and kind of dark. And I remember just like reading the first chapter and going, okay, I am not with Jane Austen anymore. Like, what is going on?
Really, they're kind of complete opposites, Emma and Jane Eyre.
Very different. Very, very different.
Yeah.
I But I remember I just like whizzed through the book. I loved it so much. And like it's probably because I was a child, but like I didn't realize that novels back then were written in the first person. And so I just remember being like, "Oh my gosh, this is so cool." Like it was the old days and they're writing in first person. And I was like, "That's so great." And I didn't know that I was just a loser. But I don't know. From the very beginning I really loved it. And I remember reading about the Red Room and
Oh yeah.
her being trapped in the Red Room, and I distinctly remember being in that stupid class they always made you take in like junior high where all you did was read.
Mm-hmm.
And I was reading that scene in that class and I was like, this is spooky as heck. And I'm like looking around at everybody else reading like comic books or whatever, and I was like, you guys have no idea, Jane Eyre is about to die in the Red Room. And I just remember being like, oh my gosh, what is going on? And I think that moment changed me as a person. I really do.
Oh yeah.
I think that Jane Eyre just has that capability. Okay, we need to talk just a little bit about the Bronte family and about where they came from, who they are, all of that jazz. Do you want to talk a little bit about them for us? Because I feel like I've been talking a lot.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I mean, I wrote notes, but I didn't really write notes.
That's fine.
Why don't you go and I'll chime in.
Okay, so the Bronte family lived in Haworth, England, in this incredible the father, the dad, Papa dude is a
Papa.
he was a I want to say priest, but that is not the right term. Minister, past minister, I think is the right word. Anyway, so preacher, a man of the cloth.
Maybe.
Okay.
Yes, he was a man of the cloth.
He is a man of the cloth. And they lived in this really beautiful house, like kind of at you guys, this village is like perched precariously on these craggy moors in England. It is the stuff of fairy tales, and their house is at the very top. And then
do you remember the story about the cemetery? And
yes, I do.
Yeah, so the cemetery is uphill from the rest of the village, so people were getting like hella sick from just living in the village, and it was because all of the water runoff would go through the cemetery and go through all like the buried bodies, and people would be drinking the contaminated water.
Yeah, people were just drinking. Cemetery. They were just drinking dead body water, and like everybody was.
They were drinking corpse tea.
They were, and nobody could figure out what was going on. And actually, the Bronte family wasn't getting sick because their house is behind the cemetery. And so
so they were uphill from the rest of them.
Their water was perfectly fine. So like they're just thriving and everybody else is dropping like flies, and they're like, dude, what the devil? No, it's just because they have this creepy cemetery that's just like contaminating their water. And didn't the guy say that like there was like in that cemetery people were just stacked on top of each other?
Yeah, just because of how many people were dying and how little room they had, they would like just stack people on top and then just add to the gravestones.
Yeah, like it's crazy. And like all around Haworth is just the most desolate moor ever, and it's like the moodiest place in the whole world. And
it's a vibe. It's for sure.
Definitely a vibe. It's incredible. And it's like when you go there you kind of realize like, oh, okay, this is where our stories come from.
When you're there, you totally like just you understand the Brontes better, and just sitting like if you're like just sitting in the path where they used to walk, like I could totally write a really depressing gothic tale.
Exactly. No, like all you have to
that's what they were surrounded
by. Exactly. Just depression all the time. And like there's this little path that I remember us walking down towards the house, and I remember thinking to myself like, oh, like this is the book, like this is Jane Eyre. And I was like, wait, how creative were you really? Like I don't know. It's like it's right here, which like obviously that's not true, but
everyone writes from their own life.
It's true. It's very true. And like, okay,
yeah,
I think I'm hysterical because in my notes it says that we need to briefly touch on Emily and possibly bash Wuthering Heights before moving on to the far superior Jane Eyre. I just freaking hate Wuthering Heights. I think it's atrocious.
I think that it's a very well-written novel. It sucks you in, but the characters, there's not a single likable character.
Yes.
Like, I hate them all. When Kathy dies, I'm like, you deserve this.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, I think she was really skilled in creating really just the most detestable of characters. Even, I don't know if there's a character that you're supposed to root for. I don't, because I hate them all.
Right.
But I think that takes skill.
I would agree, because I remember reading that book. I wanted to say for the first time, but I've only read it once because I hated it. But like, I remember reading it and being absolutely sucked in. And then at the end of the book, I was like, this is terrible. I really hate this book. And like, but it's because all of the characters are just terrible people. Like,
oh yeah, it's really the characters that you hate, but I think that's what makes it such a good book.
That's true. They're all incredibly human, I guess.
Yeah. They all suck.
They're just the worst.
Yeah.
I remember one time in my AP English class, my teacher had us do a journal one day about, like, the journal prompt was like, pick one of your favorite books and insert any weapon of your choice into that book and tell me how it would improve the story. And I distinctly remember writing, if there was a machine gun in Wuthering Heights, I think we'd all be happier. Like, I think that would improve society as a whole. But anyway, we're not here to talk about Wuthering Heights, but Emily was a great writer. She really was.
When I was in Cambridge, I was at a charity shop looking at just like the thrift book section, and I found a book of Emily Bronte's poetry that was published in it was published, but it was the book that I had was published in 1940s, and it's really old. I really treasure it.
Yeah.
And she had some really nice poetry.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah,
I like Emily.
Yeah. And I think, like, it's really cool that there were so many talented people in one family. I think that's really cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No one ever talks about Anne Bronte.
No.
Maybe we should do that another day.
Maybe you know what? That's a story for another time. The lesser known Bronte sister.
Canada Wildfell Hall is a lovely book. I enjoyed it.
It is. Like, the Bonus Jonas of the Victorian era is Anne Bronte. Okay. So
Anne Bronte is the Kevin of the Showgirls. That's so sad.
Which is awful because
I'm sorry, Anne.
Because Kevin is like, I mean, I don't really know that, I'm not like a Jonas Brothers like diehard fan, but like I know enough to know that we love Kevin and support Kevin. So like,
oh yeah.
But it's just like nobody, he just is really under the radar. Anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Jane Eyre, the story we're here to talk about.
Oh, that's why we're here.
Yeah, that is in fact why we're here. We are going to summarize the plot for everybody. We're just gonna discuss the most important characters and talk about the creepiness in general. Why don't you get us started?
Okay, so there's really kind of three parts to the plot of Jane Eyre. Hits her, she hits him back, and she just loses it. She just screams and like is just pounding on him, and I mean she's lost her temper, which makes sense. It's understandable, and so she's locked into the Red Room for punishment. And the Red Room is it's the room where her uncle died, and everyone says that that's where his spirit haunts. So she's like terrified of being in the Red Room, and she's locked in there for hours, and she eventually passes out from fright. Which she's like 10 years old at this point, so child abuse.
I'm not laughing. I'm not laughing because that's funny. It makes me uncomfortable. Okay, continue.
Oh yeah, it's horrible. Like none of this is good.
Yeah.
No. And then after that, we're introduced to Mr. Brocklehurst. Everyone loves Mr. Brocklehurst. He's the best.
Great character.
Yeah, he basically thinks that Jane is the devil. She's not getting into heaven. She's going to hell. She's a sinner.
Mm-hmm.
And I love the interaction where he's like, well, what should you do to avoid going to hell? And Jane's like, well, I should keep in perfect health and never die.
I love that part
girl.
too. You're like, you go, girl. You know, it's kind of the same thing as today. Like, she could have been horribly hurt, killed, like scammed. Like, it's a huge, huge thing. And
it's like putting out a Craigslist ad. Like, anybody can see it. Anyone can answer it.
Yeah, like, and
you don't know what you're getting into.
No, and she didn't have any kind of resources to help her or anything. So she just really goes for it. And she ends up taking a position as a governess for Adele, this child. Well, okay, it's a little bit more complicated than that. Why don't you say it?
So she's introduced as the ward of Mr. Rochester, who is off gallivanting. That's what he does. He gallivants.
Yes, as men do. They gallivant.
So she comes to Thornfield. She meets Mrs. Fairfax, this sweet old lady who runs the house. And Adele, she's French. She doesn't speak English, so it's been this struggle to acclimate her to this life in this English manner because nobody speaks French, and she doesn't speak English. So she kind of helps adjust, this. That fast, huh?
Yeah. So for a minute in the book, we kind of get like a sense of calm because Jane's like, she's at the school, like things are okay, right? But then she gets to Thornfield, and like the first night that she's there, it is so freaking creepy. She comes up to, it's like raining outside. It's such a cliche of like, it was a dark and stormy night. And she comes up to this humongous, creepy house, and she's like soaking wet and gets taken into this dimly lit room with this old woman. And you're like, great, she's about to die. And then no, it's just this like cute little housekeeper who's like, yeah, you're gonna help our little French girl. And you're like, why is this wholesome? And I still feel so creeped out.
Oh yeah. Well, just anything that happens in this giant house just feels creepy, even if it's not, because of, again, like this is kind of that gothic setting. Mm-hmm. So everything's a little unsettling, and the weather really plays into that.
Yeah, even in the most wholesome, fun parts of the book, you're like, they're about to die. Like there's just this overwhelming feeling of doom. Mm-hmm. And
oh yeah,
I don't know exactly how Charlotte Bronte was able to convey that. I don't know. Just at any moment, your life will implode upon it. So I don't know, but it's really lovely. Well, not love. It's good writing. Okay, it's what I mean. Yeah. So then Jane meets the one and only Mr. Rochester, who comes back from gallivanting.
Yeah.
And he is much different, I think, than you're led to believe. Meeting Mr. Rochester for the first time, I remember thinking, like, who the heck is this guy? Like,
well, yeah, because when she meets him, he's just some dude. She's out, walking down a trail, and this guy on a horse comes by, and the horse gets spooked, and he falls off, and he's just like, who the heck are you?
Mm-hmm.
And she ends up helping him back onto the horse, and he asks all about her. Who are you? Where do you come from? And so she tells him, I am the governess at Thornfield Hall, blah, 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 blah. She, gives him, her social security number, bank account details, all of that.
Exactly, blood type.
He says nothing about himself, and he just goes off. But, it's a really good introduction of his character, though.
Yeah.
So it's a great, first meeting. It's not a meet cute, because I don't think that kind of story.
No, they're definitely not. They're not no.
I think it's one of my favorite introductions of a character in literature, just because it really describes who he is.
It really does. And I remember thinking, because after this, you find out that he is Mr. Rochester and blah blah, and he becomes so intrigued by Jane, and he's always trying, he starts spending more time with them. He's always trying to learn more about Jane. And I remember at first thinking, this is so inappropriate for the Victorian era. Who does this guy think he is, interacting with his governess,
Oh, it's very inappropriate.
And then I just, but that's just kind of who he is.
Mm-hmm.
He just is intrigued by her and wants to know more.
He doesn't care about societal rules and expectations. He really doesn't, which becomes very evident later on.
Yes. Yes.
But yeah, the master of a house really, interacting with any of his staff, let alone the governess, would be very inappropriate. Usually those two people, those roles didn't really interact.
Right. Like her whole business really should have been with the housekeeper. She really had no need to ever
the
even
housekeeper,
speak to
or
him.
if he had a wife, she would be dealing with the wife, but he doesn't have a wife, so
he just vibes all the time, straight up vibes.
Yeah.
And he's like one of like he's so rich. He has so much money, and I think that's part of the reason that he just doesn't care about anything, because he's just he can't.
Oh yeah.
He doesn't need to.
But they really bond, and they really, really kind of, they match wits a lot. And I think that's another interesting dynamic between the two, because they're really, they're seen as equals. This rich man and this poor little woman, they're equals, which back in those times, again, is not really a dynamic you ever see.
Which, I think that's how I mean, obviously, as she grows to love him and everything, that's definitely how you know that their love is real, because they are very realistic about who the other person is. From the beginning, you know that Jane isn't a beautiful woman, and Charlotte Bronte outright writes that Mr. Rochester is ugly. So,
oh yeah, he's not a handsome man.
No, there's nothing. They really do fall in love with each other for who they are. They're just so intrigued by each other's minds. And there's just something so wildly romantic about that.
Enter Blanche Ingram and that party.
He holds this huge house party and invites 500 people. And by that I mean there's 10 of them.
Yeah, it's, one of the, back in the day, you would invite people to your house and they would stay for months.
Yes. A house party was come stay with me for months.
But people also had the rooms and the resources to house and feed people for that long.
Right. Okay, so this is when the supernatural stuff is starting to come again. It's when
yes. So kind of right before the party is, Jane is in her bed, she's sleeping, and she hears some creepy laughter, and I think, if I remember, there's something's rattling at her door, and she wakes up and it's what fresh hell is this? Let me check it out. Way to go, girl. I would maybe put my head under the covers and just wait till morning, but good for her. And so she goes to investigate, and she finds Mr. Rochester asleep. His bed is on fire. And so she wakes him up, she dumps water on him and tries to get the fire out. Then he leaves her alone.
I freaking hate that part. He just leaves her soaking wet in his room. And he's like, "Can you stay here?" And then he's gone for an hour.
He's gone for a long time, and she's just sitting there in his bedroom.
What the heck?
And then he comes back later, and then he is "Oh, I found out what happened. You don't need to tell anybody. I've got it." He's "Okay, well, you can go to bed." And so she leaves, and then he's "Wait, you're gonna leave me?"
He's "You just saved my life, and you're gonna leave?" And she's "Bro, it's the middle of the night."
Right? She's "I'm cold and wet." And it's 4 a.m. But, that's really where their romantic tension builds.
Yeah.
Because then he, shakes her hand. They touch skin to skin, which, scandal.
Oh, my
goodness. Then, yeah, that's really where their romantic tension builds. And then the next morning, he's gone.
Yeah. It's so stupid, because you're OMG, we're going places. Yeah. And then the next morning, the housekeeper's bruh, he's gone. And you're why?
Yeah. And then when she asks about the fire, you say, "Hey, did anyone hear about this fire that happened?" "Oh yeah, the master was reading with the candle and he fell asleep and the candle caught his bed on fire." That's not what happened.
Totally not.
The household staff are just they just ignore everything that goes on in the house. They're just like, yeah, same old.
Yeah.
But, Jane, she also starts to realize there's something weird going on here.
Yeah.
And no one's talking about it.
Well, and there's an employee in the house who you never
Grace Poole.
Yeah, Grace Poole, and you never really see her. You don't really know what she does, and Jane immediately becomes suspicious of her.
Yeah, because nobody knows what Grace Poole does, but she gets paid really well for it.
Mm-hmm.
She is kind of creepy. She's like an old lady.
Yes.
And because she's old and creepy, Jane immediately suspects her of foul play.
Right. So she's like, OMG, Grace Poole set your bed on fire. What the heck? And and I love it because she later confronts Grace Poole about something or I feel like I remember her confronting someone and being like, this is what's going on. And
she confronts Grace Poole about the fire, just like, oh, strange how his bed caught on fire. And Grace is like, yeah, crazy. Imagine that. And then Jane's like, oh, it's so weird that before I found the bed on fire, I heard someone laughing. Grace Poole's like, oh, maybe it was the dog. And Jane's like, dogs can't laugh. And just Grace is just like, huh, funny, weird.
Crazy world,
totally
a lot of smells.
Just dismisses everything.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, wow, that's weird.
So I feel like at that moment, Jane is like, am I going crazy? Because literally everybody else is like, there is nothing going on in this house. Fires start all the time. And you're just like, no.
Well, I mean, yeah. Yeah, so she's really suspicious of things, but she's also conflicted with her feelings for Mr. Rochester, and I think those things kind of get mixed up.
Yeah.
But then he returns, but he comes back with the party, the aforementioned party, with Blanche Ingram, who you hear about her before she gets there. All of the maids and the housekeeper, they keep talking about how beautiful she is and how they think that Mr. Rochester is going to propose to her. And then it gets really sad because Jane is like, oh, of course he would love this beautiful woman and not me because I'm so plain and I'm poor. And she really dumps on herself. She draws two different pictures, and she draws herself all ugly and just plain, and then she draws this beautiful picture of what she imagines Blanche Ingram to look like, and you just want to be like, girl.
And she's like, hey,
a better opinion of yourself.
I know, because she compares the two. She's like, hey, look at how ugly you are, and look at this beautiful woman that he's obviously in love with, and you're like, girlfriend, no.
So Mr. Rochester he's very attentive to her, and they sing and they dance and they flirt, and the entire time that they're there, he demands that Jane be in the same room as them,
which is so freaking weird. I will never not think that that's so weird, and it's actually really mean.
It's mean, but also there's no reason for her to be there. She's the governess,
right? And
she shouldn't even have anything to do with any of these people, but he insists that she's in the room every night.
I know, it's ridiculous. And it's Kate, later you realize, okay, he's definitely got feelings for Jane, but at this point she doesn't know that, and you as the reader don't know that, and so you're like, oh my gosh, this jerk,
what are you doing?
He's just making her sit there and watch him flirt with this beautiful woman and be all suave, and then all of the people start talking horribly about governesses and how bad they are, and you're just like, why is this happening? Jane has been through enough.
And then there's the whole scene there's a fortune teller woman who comes. So Rochester leaves for a few days or something. You know how when you have people at your house, you just leave and you leave them in your house.
Yes. Yeah.
As one does.
Yes.
When you have then while he's gone, this fortune teller gypsy woman, knocks on the door and insists on telling people's fortunes.
And they're all like, okay, we're bored. Let's do it. The host
is gone. We have nothing to do. She also insists on telling Jane's fortune. And so they start kind of having a battle of the words. And Jane finds out that it's not a fortune teller, but surprise, surprise, it's Mr. Rochester.
In the movie adaptations, there's just like a gypsy lady there and he's hiding behind the curtain. But in the book, he is the gypsy lady. And you're like,
Yeah.
dude, what the heck? So in the book, he's just like messing with everybody.
Yeah, because he knows about them and he can tell them things about them. And yeah, so he's just messing with everybody because he thinks it's funny. Before he comes dressed up as the fortune teller, this man comes to visit. He's not, nobody knows who he is, but he's there to visit Mr. Rochester. His name is Mr. Mason. He's not a part of the group. Nobody knows why he's there. And so when Jane is talking to Mr. Rochester, she says, oh, by the way, this guy came. His name is Mr. Mason. He's here to see you. And Rochester just like, he completely changes. He just like, I think he almost swoons in the book.
Yeah.
He has to sit down.
I love how often they get like swoony back then. Like, it's because you didn't have protein. But like, I don't get that swoony now.
No. We should bring back swooning.
We should. I'm here for that.
I've had a shock. I need to sit down. I need to sit down before I faint.
I like need to take to my bed. My poor nerves have been shaken violently.
And he starts talking strangely. He's like, oh, if everybody in this room abandoned me and turned away from me, would you still stay with me? And she's like, sure, dude. Yeah, I'll stay with you. And she doesn't know what he's talking about, but clearly the presence of Mr. Mason has very much upset him.
That's so funny that you put it that way, because I feel like Jane is always doing that to him. Like, he just says these wild, outrageous things, and she's just like, yeah, bro, yeah. Like, she just humors him.
Yeah, really. She humors him sometimes. And then other times she really calls him on it. But this is, like, it's clear that he's not playing anymore, and he's, like, really upset. And then, so everyone goes to bed, and Jane is, snoozing. And then there's just like this blood-curdling scream that wakes everybody up. And you can hear people, like a commotion outside. And the first thing that Jane thinks when she hears this is, oh, I better get dressed. So she
resourceful.
Oh, yeah. She's like, oh, I might be needed. So I'm just going to get dressed and wait.
That's what happens when you're staff at Mr. Rochester's house. You're like, hey, it's the middle of the night. I should probably get dressed.
Yeah, which she ends up being needed. Rochester comes out and says, oh, a servant has had a nightmare. We have to take care of her. And everybody believes him. Jane doesn't. And he asks her to come with him, and he takes her up like to a room and then to a room off of another room.
Creepy tower.
Which is never a good thing to have. But behind the room, in the room, Mr. Mason's there, and he's like all bloody, and he's got this huge like wound on his chest and his neck, and he's been like torn at. Looks like somebody tried to bite him. He's just like bloody. And Rochester's like, take care of him. Try to, stop the bleeding, but don't talk to him. And then he leaves her.
He leaves her with
Again.
A strange wounded man and is like, hey, help him, but don't say a frickin' word and I'll be back.
Right? And so she's trying to keep this guy from dying, and she's trying to take care of him, but I think she can also hear some like laughing or some scraping or the room is really scary. And she's just this little girl alone with this man
who's bleeding in the middle of the night.
It's one of the creepiest parts of the book, I think.
I agree. Like, it's just a recipe for horribleness all the way around. And once again, Rochester is gone for like ever. He's gone for several hours.
A long time. And then he comes back, and he comes with the doctor, and they get Mr. Mason out of the creepy tower into a carriage and send him on his way. And again, Mr. Rochester is like, oh, don't tell anyone about this. I'll explain what happened. And he doesn't.
He never does.
He
and
doesn't
she's
tell
just
anyone
like,
about this.
Okay.
And once again, Jane suspects Grace Poole. And now she's like, well, damn, Grace Poole is dangerous. Why is she still here?
Why are you paying her?
And he doesn't explain why.
he is more than happy to let Grace Poole take the fall for all of this.
Absolutely.
But he's not going to explain.
Jane is here thinking that Grace Poole is, I don't know, a werewolf or monster, something.
Yeah.
And she truly believes that this is a dangerous woman, and Rochester kind of lets her believe it.
Mm-hmm.
It's oh yeah, this is definitely Grace Poole, blah, 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 blah. But he won't explain why he keeps such a dangerous woman in his house.
And pays her very well to do so.
She appears to do nothing but cause havoc and chaos and bodily harm. But she's just chilling in his house.
So we have this whole house party thing that eventually everybody leaves. And I feel like, I didn't skip anything. Eventually everybody leaves.
Jane gets a letter, or she gets, so somebody comes to visit Jane, and it was the old maid from her aunt's house.
Yes.
And she's come to tell Jane that her cousin is dead, the one who was beating up on her at the beginning of the book.
Mm-hmm.
And her aunt has a stroke, and she's been asking to see Jane. So Jane goes to see the aunt, and before she leaves, she tells Mr. Rochester, "Hey, I need money. You haven't paid me."
Yes.
And he's like, "Well, what do you need money for?" Because it's her money, dude. She's earned it.
I know.
And there's a weird exchange between, okay, you owe me 20 pounds, but, I have a 50-pound note. Well, that's too much money. You don't owe me that much money. And he's like, well, then I have 5 pounds or something like that. And she's like, well, I'll just take that then.
It's so weird, this whole thing about money.
Yeah.
And then he's like, well,
it's, I think it's just, she doesn't want to be indebted to him, because if she took the 50 pounds, that's way more than what he owed her. And then she felt like she'd owe him something. So
but that plays into Jane is just so purely good. And I think that Rochester kind of preys on that sometimes. He's not in a malicious way. I just think he's kind of let's kind of have fun with Jane because she's such a good person. Let me make her uncomfortable, kind of. But he's asking her well, how long are you going to be gone? I don't want you to be gone very long. And she's like, bruh, I'll be gone as long as I need to be gone. And he's but I don't want you to leave, blah blah blah. And she's like, okay, well, I'm leaving now. So she leaves.
Yeah. And so she goes to the aunt, and the aunt's on her deathbed, and she admits to Jane there was some letter that came from an uncle who it was an uncle on her mother's side, or her father's side?
Whatever side is not this side.
Yeah.
Yes.
The other side. So she has an uncle who is trying to find her because he's become very wealthy, and when he dies, he wants to leave her his money. And the aunt wrote to the uncle saying that Jane was dead. And so that's been, I guess, tormenting her for the last few years. And so she admits it on her deathbed. And yeah, so but the aunt still won't, I guess, it's weird. She feels guilty about this, but then she also won't apologize for how she treated Jane.
No, she's like, I feel really bad that I lied and said you were dead and deprived you of a future, but also I just hate you because I still think you're a terrible person. And it's
yeah, she's like, I only did it because I hate you.
Okay, that all makes sense. Thank you for that.
Yeah. And Jane is like, well, I forgive you. You can die in peace. And then she does, and dies.
Yeah. And there's
and then she goes back to Thornfield.
Yeah. I mean, while she's there, there's this whole scene with her and her female cousins, and it's actually hysterical. But
yeah, well, she leaves on good terms with her cousins. That was actually nice.
Yeah, she does. Yeah, it's very.
They become, somewhat friends, or not friends, but they're not
amicable.
They don't hate each other. Yeah.
So she finally gets back to Thornfield, and Rochester's like, OMG, why have you been gone for 7,000 years? And she's like, I said I'd be gone as long as I was needed. And he's like, I'm so glad you're home.
And when she gets back, she finds out that Mr. Rochester plans on getting married. And she naturally assumes it's Blanche Ingram, because that's who he has hinted at for days that that's who he plans on marrying.
Yes. And there's like preparations afoot and like lots of stuff going on.
Yeah, and Jane is like, well, if you're going to get married, obviously I can't hang around anymore, and Adele needs to go to school.
Mm-hmm.
And Mr. Rochester's like, okay, well, don't advertise. I'll find you a new job, which I would be like, sus.
Right.
But she just goes with it. And she's really sad about this because she's going to miss him terribly because, she really cares for him.
She's totally in love with him, but she like doesn't let herself think about it or acknowledge it because it's so out of reach.
Mm-hmm.
But she's heartbroken over leaving him and over leaving Adele, and like have like this time that she's had at Thornfield Hall has been so transformative for her.
Yeah, it's completely different from her time at the school where there she was. She was mocked, she was, treated terribly, and then she comes to Thornfield and she's treated like an equal. She's part of this, not a family, but I guess if you're, if you all work in the same house, you kind of become a little family-ish.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, and now she has to leave all of that, the happiest time she's ever known, she has to leave. So she goes out into the garden. She's just wrecked with emotion. And then Rochester goes out to talk to her.
Oh my gosh, it's so beautiful.
And it's like, oh, I found you a new position as a governess, yada, yada, yada. And she's like, do you think this makes me happy that I'm leaving? And he's like, well, what do you mean by that? And he's totally kind of goading her into saying...
Oh, yeah. Like, he's fishing hardcore.
Oh, he's fishing for compliments.
Oh, yeah. Like, it's actually... he's so mean. Like, ugh.
It was really mean. Like, the whole thing was mean.
Because she's so... Like, she starts to cry. Like, she's so distraught. And she eventually is like, dude, like, I don't want to leave you.
Yeah, she's like, I don't want to leave you, but I have to leave you. And so she's like, I'm leaving now. And Rochester's like, no, you're not leaving. I am leaving. No, you're not leaving. And you're like, dude, you just told her she had to leave.
Right.
He does that a lot. He'll say something, and then when she does it, he'll be like, what are you doing?
Like, I'm doing what you said.
That's the thing that he does. And then he admits that, oh, no, I love you, and I want to marry you.
Oh, it's so beautiful.
It's if you forget what happened right before that, it's really sweet.
I mean, yeah, like, it's a terrible way that he like, I don't know why he couldn't just be like, listen, I'm in love with you. Like, why? I don't understand completely why he had to like make her miserable into admitting it. I don't know. Maybe because she just doesn't really face her emotions ever. I mean, she lives very much inside her own head, but it's like,
yeah,
maybe that was his way of just being like, hey, like, let's face the reality here. I don't know, but
maybe.
So
he's trying to work her up into a lather so she starts saying what she feels.
Yeah, maybe. But like,
emotional manipulation
exactly
is romantic.
Totally love that for everybody. And but then this romance scene between them is so sweet. Like, she's like, wait a second, like, you love me? And he's like, yeah, I super do. I would like to marry you. And you're like, shut up. And they kiss, and it's like so cute.
It's very sweet. And then the next day,
wait, no, but as they're leaving the garden, it's raining, right?
Oh yes, it's raining, and then there's there's like this huge like lightning storm, and the tree that I think it was the tree that he proposed to her under like was struck by lightning, and it like split in half and it's dead.
And so there's like this sense of impending doom, like there is throughout the whole book, but you're like, oh my gosh, no, they're in love, they love each other, they're going to get married. So wedding preparations begin.
Yes, and Mrs. Fairfax is not happy about this.
No.
She thinks that this is a terrible mistake, and she tells Jane this.
She like says something like, Jane, you're so sensible. Like, why are you doing this? This is a really bad decision.
ever since Mr. Rochester told her that he and Jane were getting married, she's been telling Jane to, like, just be careful.
Yes.
And Jane initially kind of thinks that it's, oh, well, obviously she doesn't think that Mr. Rochester could love me because I'm a governess and I'm poor and I'm plain. Fairfax, like, no, it's just, she's not thrilled about the situation and she just wants Jane to be careful and to keep her guard up. Yeah.
There's this feeling that she definitely has something going on, but she, like, won't say anything.
She's got something on her mind. She's in bed one day and she's having dreams, tumultuous dreams, as one does before they're about to get married.
Mm-hmm.
Wakes up and there's, like, somebody standing over her and then leaves. And then in the morning, she shows this to Mr. Rochester and she's like, see, I'm not crazy. This isn't all in my head. Look at this veil.
Which, like, can we talk about how she wakes up with a figure over her and watches this figure destroy her wedding veil and then she goes back to sleep?
Yeah.
What is that?
Different times, man.
It's wild. Yeah. So anyway,
Yeah. Yeah, so she shows this to Rochester as, like, here's proof that, I didn't dream this. And he's like, okay, well, I think I know what happened. He basically explains that you were dreaming and part of it was a dream and part of it was real life. And it's obviously Grace Poole, who you already think is crazy. And I can't get rid of her, but you're just going to have to trust me.
Like, we love
just attitude towards the wedding. I'd be a little, okay, let's just get this over with.
I know, because she's like so excited. I mean, it's her freaking wedding day to the man she loves. And so everybody's like, yay, let's celebrate. And he's like, no, we have to hurry. Like, he's like runs them to the chapel. And you're just like, dude, what is going on?
She's at the altar, like, sweating and panting because he has them run up there so fast.
And you're just like, my dude, my buddy, my pal.
And Rochester is like, no, you're lying. I don't have a wife. And then Mr. Mason shows up and is like, I know that you have a wife. It's my sister, and I know she's alive.
Oh, no.
And then at that point, Rochester, I think he realizes the jig is up. And he's like, okay, everybody come meet my wife. And he takes everybody up to the tower, including Jane.
The room off of the room.
The room off of the room. And we see Grace Poole sitting there and she's like, be careful. I don't know if you want to go in there. And he goes in there and we see Mrs. Rochester, who's been locked up in this tower. And she is, by their accounts, she's a mad woman. She's crazy. She's got this long, ragged black hair. She's in this white gown. And when she sees Mr. Rochester and Jane, she just goes into this fury and starts attacking everybody. Just goes on the attack, and they have to calm her down again.
Yes.
And we finally learn what Mr. Rochester's been hiding all of this time. It's a wife. Mm-hmm.
A whole entire wife.
So now he and Jane can't get married, and nobody knew about this wife. Except for Mrs. Poole, which is why she was paid so well and seemingly did nothing, because nobody knew what she did. She was like the nurse for Mrs. Rochester, and the times that she got out and caused chaos was just Grace was drunk and had passed out. Mm-hmm. That was how she escaped.
It's like, and like, you hear that, they met a long time ago and he was passionately in love with her, and her family, like, really rushed the marriage. Mm-hmm. And then after they'd been married, like, not long at all, her mental illness became apparent. Mm-hmm. And, by the standards of their day, she's considered a mad woman, but he couldn't bear to put her in an asylum.
Yeah. And, it actually, it was, probably the kinder thing to do was to just lock her up in his house as opposed to sending her to an asylum.
Oh,
really.
definitely.
I know that, people talk about, oh, he locked his wife up. He was so cruel to her. It's like the crueler thing to do was just leave her in asylum and forget about her, where she could, die of, an illness or be experimented on or be abused, beaten. It was really the kinder thing to do was to take care of her in his own home.
Right. And like he actually mentions that, and like if he had put her in an asylum, she probably wouldn't have survived for very long.
Mm-hmm.
But he knows that, like, in its own way, that's murder.
Yeah.
And so he's like, no, like, I wasn't going to do that to her.
Yeah. He could have taken the easy way out, but he didn't. He did, probably what he thought was, doing right by her. There weren't a lot of options. He couldn't divorce her, or there was a lot of, his hands were really tied.
Yeah.
Not to say, it wasn't great, but, it could have been a lot worse.
Right. Not condoning the actions in any way. I remember when I finally learned about the wife, I was actually vastly disappointed that the house wasn't haunted. And
yeah, it wasn't a haunted house. It was just some lady.
It was just a crazy lady. Like, I was so upset. Mm-hmm. Like, so there's no ghost, but okay. Like, dang it.
Yeah. But now Jane and Rochester can't get married, and Rochester suggests that Jane live with him as his mistress, and they can, they can act as if they are married, but they can't be by, the eyes of God and, the eyes of the law. They can't be.
But they'll be married in every other way.
But he's like, you'll be my wife, like, in my heart, I'll be faithful to you. But, he can't do that because he's married, and is like, no, it's wrong. And
yeah, she's an honorable
person.
Degrading
myself to do that. So she leaves him.
She leaves. I think like in the middle of the night, very early in the morning. Anyway, she leaves. And she doesn't have any money. She has nowhere to go. She just like sets off on her own over the moors and is homeless for a while.
She finds this little village, starts, begging for food, and people are turning her away. And then she winds up on the doorstep of this house in the middle of a storm, and these two very kind women bring her in and, get her warm, put her in a nice warm bed. She's ill for a while, and they kind of nurse her back to health. St. John.
His name is St. John, and he is so holier than thou. I just cannot deal. These two women are lovely, though, and they kind of like adopt Jane, basically. They're just like, hey, can we keep her?
Yeah, they just want to keep her. They're like, oh, just live with us forever. We'll take care of you. Mm-hmm. And Jane is like, no, I need to find a job. I need to be useful. And St. John's like, yeah, you shouldn't have to be a burden on everyone. I'll find you a job. And he finds her a really good job, actually.
Yes.
She becomes the schoolmistress for the girls of the farmers and the workers there. It comes with a salary, and it comes with a house. And so it's a really good position that he finds her.
It is. It's a great gig. And, she's still close to them. And so they're kind of like, they basically become her family, and she gets to spend time with them all the time and have a life, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then one day St. John like pays a visit to her cottage, and I don't remember how he discovers this, but
doesn't he get a letter?
Something like that, yes. So when they find her, she gives them a different name. Her name is like Jane Edwards, Jane
Elliot, I think.
Elliot, yeah, Jane Elliot. And so St. John discovers that her name is not Jane Elliot, it's Jane Eyre. And he finds out about Mr. Rochester and her past. And he also, finds out that they're related, they're cousins. Which that's crazy. Out of all the people in the world whose doorstep you could land on, you end up on your cousin's doorstep.
I know. And they're like fairly close cousins too, like second or third cousins, I think. And
I think they're first cousins, maybe.
I don't, and you're just like,
yeah,
literally
they're
how?
closely related. and he tells her that she's an heiress, that her uncle, if you go back to, her aunt who was dying, told her uncle that Jane was dead. This was the same uncle. He had made a lot of money in Jamaica, probably from,
very,
not great,
in very wholesome ways.
Yes, absolutely wholesome ways.
Yep.
But anyway.
That's neither here nor there.
Yeah. So she's rich. She's inherited all of his money, and I think it's, in modern money, it would be like millions of dollars. She's very rich.
She's loaded, and he's like, congrats. And she's like, I don't know how to have money.
Yeah. And so to her, she's more excited about finding relatives and finding that these people that she's come to love are actually her family. So she decides to share it with them.
Yeah. So she splits up her inheritance among herself, the two sisters, and Sinjin. And she's like, hey, like, I'm so happy that we're actually family. And they're like, okay, like, we'll just call each other brothers and sisters now.
Yeah, things are great. And then Sinjin decides to ruin it all.
Oh my gosh.
He wants to go on a mission to India.
And he's like, hey, do you know what would be a really great idea, Jane, if you came with me? And she's like, okay, like, that might be kind of fun. He's like, but listen, if you do this, we have to get married. And she's like,
she's not with that.
I like this idea less.
Yeah. She wants to go with him to India. She'll be happy to go, be a missionary with him, but she doesn't want to marry him because she doesn't love him.
Right.
And he's, well, we can't go unless we're married. And then she's like, well, then I won't go. And then he gets all kind of holier than thou. Oh, God has called you to be, missionary's wife, blah, 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 blah. Why do you speak to the air? Whatever. So they're on the outs, and he's really angry that she won't go to India with him and won't marry him. And then she hears her wind.
Her name in the wind.
She hears her name in the wind. Yes.
Oh, yes.
Someone like saying Jane, and like calling for her. And so she decides she needs to go check up on Mr. Rochester.
It's a very summarized version of what happens.
Yes.
Which is fine, because we've been doing this summary for like ever now.
This is a really long summary. We need to wrap it up. But the ending is so good. I love the ending of this book.
It's so beautiful. It's
so
beautiful.
So she leaves Sinjin and his sisters, and she returns to Thornfield, and it's in ruins. It's burnt down to the ground. And we learn that Mrs. Rochester, Bertha, had set the house on fire and jumped off of the roof. Mr. Rochester has been horribly disfigured because he was trying to save everybody from the house, but then he was trying to get her down off of the roof and keep her from jumping, which he wasn't able to do. And then he got burnt in the house. So he's lost a hand. He's blind.
Mm-hmm.
He went blind. And he's really just disfigured. Like, his face is all scarred. He wasn't that much of a catch before, but now he's really ugly.
Right.
So Jane has returned to him, a wealthy woman, and he still has money, but he's not as kind of a proud figure as he was before.
Oh.
And he is living in this little cottage, and he has like Mrs. Fairfax to take care of him, and then some other person, and he's sitting in a chair, and Jane brings in like a tray of water or something, and she leaves it down, and he can sense that she's there, and it's really sweet because he's like, oh, it's Jane Eyre, and they have a really sweet reunion, and then
where he's like, wait, it is you, like, you are real, and he like starts to cry.
It's so sweet. And then she kind of explains, where she's been, what happened to her, and it's so funny. They're going to turn in for the night. She's going to go to her bed. He goes, were there only ladies there? And she just like totally leaves him hanging. She's like, whatever. And just like lets him stew over, oh, maybe she has a new beau.
But then, They live happily ever after.
They do. They get married because his wife is dead. She's conveniently out of the way now.
Yes, exactly.
And then, they get married. They have a baby. He kind of regains vision in one of his eyes, but he's not like completely seeing. And then, that's the end of it. It's very sweet.
It's a very beautiful ending to a rather dark and spooky and tragic story.
That ends happily.
It ends very happily, which is, it's really, I don't know. I mean, most stories, I think, like the story is supposed to start out kind of horrible and it gets horrible. Like it's supposed to like be horrible and then have a happy ending, but there's something about this story where it's like it's just dark and scary and spooky for so long, and then all of a sudden it's like sunshine, we'll live happily ever after. And you're like,
this can't end happily.
You're like, there's no way this is real, but it is.
A lot of times in Gothic literature, things don't end happily.
Right.
Like someone dies, like the love interest dies, someone dies, there's some miscommunication where there's something, and then nothing ends happily. But this one does.
It does, and it's chef's kiss, brilliant.
Yes. So that's the end. Reader, I married him.
Oh, I love that line. It's beautiful. That is the end of the book. That is our quote-unquote summary of the book. Yeah. Let's talk a teeny bit about some of the film adaptations. So I have seen 2 film adaptations. I've seen the 2006 miniseries, and I have seen the more recent Michael Fassbender movie. And here's the thing. I am obsessed with the 2006 miniseries. It's the first one.
Very good.
It's so good. It's the first one I ever saw. I feel like it follows the book beautifully. It takes liberties in all the right places.
Oh, yeah.
Does it get better than the 2006 version?
My favorite adaptation is this one from 1983. It's a mini-series. I think it was BBC. It's not, the prettiest, most aesthetically pleasing one. Like, the 2011 movie, they really played into kind of like the Gothic vibes.
Yes.
But the one from 1983, it's very faithful to the novel. And the actors who play Jane and Rochester, I think, capture their characters the best.
Ugh, I'll have to watch it now.
It's very good. So the guy who plays Mr. Rochester is Timothy Dalton. I think he played James Bond for maybe a film.
Yes, I know him.
Yeah, and he does a really good job of kind of the just he really captures like the prickliness and kind of how mood swingy Rochester is. He does that really well.
Yeah.
And, I don't particularly find him, conventionally handsome, which, people may disagree with me, but I don't find him handsome.
Go off in the comments, everyone.
He's a very fine actor. And this is not to like roast someone's looks.
I don't know.
But he has the kind of the dark hair.
Yeah.
And just he does a very good job. He does a very good job. And the actress who plays Jane, I've never seen her in anything else. This is the only thing I've seen her in. She's a very petite woman, so their contrast between this very tiny, she's plain,
Yeah.
You can't really talk. She's not a beautiful woman, but she fits Jane very well. I don't want this to come off as insulting people's looks, but
no,
I
because I know you. I know that's not what you're doing, and I know that you're having a really hard time articulating how much you actually love this adaptation. Everybody.
She also really she really portrays Jane's character very well. She's spunky. She can be soft-spoken at times. Like I really love it, and just it's my favorite adaptation of Jane Eyre. I do have a couple of issues with the movie with Michael Fassbender. One being, Michael Fassbender's way too hot to be Mr. Rochester.
I think he does a fine job, but
She does a good job, but
I agree. He's not.
The scene where they're talking about, do you find me handsome? And she's like, no, sir. I'm like, who are you kidding? And the reunion at the end, to me, was really unsatisfying because they really just kind of do the Pride and Prejudice, the like forehead touch with the sun shining through them.
Yeah.
And that was it. And I think they were really going for like the whole Pride and Prejudice thing. And it's like, this movie is not Pride and Prejudice.
It's not. And like I think they did a really good job with like the gothic darkness the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think they tried too hard to just keep that going because like we just talked about, like the end is very happy. It's okay for them to be happy at the end, but there is no like high moment at the end in that movie.
Yeah, and the novel doesn't end with, oh, they reunite and then the end. They kind of get back into their old kind of banter, and she doesn't she really torments him over, this like St. John. She's like, oh yes, he's very handsome. He was so handsome. He proposed marriage to me. And Rochester's like, rah, 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 I want you to go back and marry him then. Rah, rah. He's really mad about it. And they don't address that at all in the movie. And it really bothers me because that's one of my favorite parts.
I know.
At the end.
It's so great.
Yeah.
I think that one has a lot to be, it leaves a lot to be desired, I think.
Yeah, and the fact that it's a movie as opposed to a mini-series, it's much shorter, so you can't fit everything in.
Right. But some things...
some things you need to make room for.
Yeah, I agree.
I could have added like an extra 5 minutes to the movie and added a little scene at the end. I mean, I watch it a lot. I love, I do like that they added that scene where she's sitting in her cottage and there's a snowstorm outside.
Yes.
And she's dreaming and Rochester shows up at the door. He's like windswept and she pulls him in. And I really loved that scene. And then just a contrast where, no, it's actually St. John at her door.
I also really love that scene. I think it really beautifully portrays like just how much she misses Rochester while she's gone.
Yeah, and that she's a woman with desires. She is a woman with needs. And, kind of in, Victorian England, women didn't have desires and needs.
No, and
you suppressed them.
Exactly. And like just the fact, she's just so wonderful. She's like in this home that is hers.
Yeah.
And has this job that is hers by her own merit. And she's like just sitting there like, hey, I miss the man I love. And it's like there's all of these things about her.
Yeah, well, and she's still at war with, doing what she knows is the right thing to do versus what she wants. And I'm sure, she wanted to stay with, Mr. Rochester. She had that old inner monologue, like, who would care if I did this? There's nobody that I have to answer to. It's just me. And then she's like, no, I would care. I respect myself. And even though she wants to stay with him and she's very attracted by his offer of being his mistress, she can't do it because she has something called self-respect.
Exactly. She's phenomenal in every way. I love her so much. I just love Jane Eyre. And I love how beautiful of a love story it is. I love how creepy it is. Like, it's just perfect. Just perfect. So thank you so much, Quinn, for being here and
thank you
and talking with us about Jane Eyre and being on our Halloween episode. What are your plans for Halloween this year?
Well, Halloween, I don't know what I'm doing per se, as if I'm going to a Halloween party. Probably am, just don't know what yet. A group of my friends we're going as the Teletubbies.
Oh gosh.
I know, and I'm the green one. What's the name?
I have literally no idea.
I don't know.
No clue.
But I'm kind of doing a cowboy theme. So I have this green morph suit, and I have these silver cowboy boots, and I have a hat, and it's a whole thing.
That's gonna be lovely. I'm
really excited. It's so stupid, but I'm so excited.
No.
And then I can't wear this costume to work because the suit has, it covers my hands like in gloves, and I have to wear gloves at work when I do my blood draws.
Mm-hmm. Quinn is a biologist, everybody, by the way.
I am, yeah. And I'm also a phlebotomist. I'm a research phlebotomist. Anyway,
Mm-hmm.
So I have this like witchy dress that I'm going to wear and be kind of creepy and gothic on Halloween.
Oh, I love that.
So I have 2 different costumes. One that's more work appropriate, or one that I can wear while also being compliant with like work safety.
Uh-huh. No, that makes sense. Well, I love you so much. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you. I enjoyed myself.
I had a great time.
Thank you for letting me talk about one of my favorite things.
Absolutely. Thank you for. There is not a better person on this world to talk about Jane Eyre with. So thank you again. And
thank you.
Yes, everybody enjoy your Halloween. Be safe out there. Thanks for hanging out with me and Quinn. And by that, I mean, thank you for just listening to us talk to each other about Jane Eyre. You can give me a follow on Instagram at notstrictlyhistory_podcast. You can send me a Gmail at notstrictlyhistory@gmail.com. Or if you're feeling super generous, you can join listener support. That will be in the description box and all of that jazz. I love you guys. Have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you next time on Not Strictly History. Bye.
Bye.